How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'll just step up in the middle of Robert's presentation and go get water. That'd be great. No, I'm just gonna go grab some water. We can stop back. So.
I know.
Yeah.
So is it off mute?
It's all right now. As you see those going, I mean, if you want to go off.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Coaching staff. You've probably never heard of him before in your life.
But I'm going to ask somebody who would know.
Of course you are. Here he is. So Mike Salkin is the hockey director.
Dangerous.
Mike Salkin.
I think we should wait
That
for
name sounds
him.
familiar.
Well, he's been in the business forever. He's been in the business for a very long time. And they only have about four at most 5 girls her age bracket who bill it. So, it's going to be...
Everybody else is local.
No, they fly in for weekends.
Oh,
they,
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But he's recruiting the greater Dallas area. All he has a rural recruiter, so
Yeah.
Wyoming is a rural recruiter in Odessa.
Yeah.
Somebody who goes out and is like, all right, well, who's in these other states I can grab?
Yeah.
That goes as far as Alaska. Well,
All right. I think we are all here and it's about time. Dr. Gonzalez will not be here as she's traveling. And so we can call the meeting to order and start with the Pledge of Allegiance and salute the New Mexico flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The flag of the state of New Mexico is a symbol of perfect friendship among united cultures. Saludo a la bandera embajada de México, el símbolo de amistad perfecta entre culturas unidas. And we will continue with the acknowledgement of tribal land. We acknowledge that our Board of Education meetings take place on occupied indigenous land. We acknowledge the secret Pueblo lands and other tribal lands on which we stand. We honor these people, past, present, and future. We acknowledge the history and ongoing colonization where we are sitting right now in Mexico and our future. We acknowledge our own place in the story of colonization. Okay, we will move on to approval of the agenda. Superintendent, are there any changes?
No changes this evening. Board President Anderson.
Excellent. So we can move to introduction of the interpreters. Superintendent. Oh, we have to approve the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Is there a second? Okay, thanks. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed or otherwise? Right. Now we'll move on. Thank you. Before we went into an author. Great. Thank you. And now we will move into the meat of the meeting, the Finance Subcommittee presentation budget review.
Thank you, Board President Anderson, members of the board, executive team, those in the audience. Tonight we're going to go over kind of a framework, also provide you guys with a timeline, what it looks like currently. There's some slides that we'll be discussing, such as ETN, cash balance, geo bond, things of that nature. Also, just a quick overview of what our budget currently looks like. As you remember, when we passed and you guys approved our budget last school year, we always mentioned that it's always changing, and you will see that it has. We've exceeded $400 million as far as our entire budget goes, and we'll continue to push forward with providing great services and also the ability to balance our budget. Just want everybody to really, hear that you guys as board members, the team here, the executive team have done a great job of keeping us within our own means. Because I keep reading papers from around the U.S. of districts cutting jobs, starting in a deficit, and I think tonight we'll just start to show you a glimpse of where we're at as far as a district and how we're operating financially. Again, I think the biggest driver here is going to be when we attend the New Mexico Spring Budget Workshop. It's been a long week and a half. The Spring Budget Workshop. And once we attend that, we start to get all the drivers that really produce the budget for us. So right now, it's just kind of an overview, timeline, kind of a projection, but we didn't want to get too far ahead because anything that we would discuss as far as next year's budget would be an absolute guess. So for us right now, we're going to go over. I've talked to the team today. During these study sessions, it's more interactive, more engagement. So board members, if you guys see something, please jump in. We're here to answer. And then my team, when you guys speak, just for the first time, just make sure we announce your name and title, just so everybody's aware. But this is the budget team and a few others that you'll see over the next few months. Again, we've talked last year having something early so you guys can really start to take a look at it, start to develop board priorities, but then come back with a study session, right, where we go into maybe comparison between current year and upcoming year, and then really get into the meat and potatoes of the budget. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and start with the presentation. So the upcoming 24-25 timeline, June 29th through February 8th, we met with all departments and all school sites based on projections, based on enrollment, staffing patterns. But again, we do know those could change because we may see an increase or decrease in enrollment, but we also may need to adjust staffing. So it was really about just informing them of a projection. And I think that's gone a long way because this has helped us inform sites and departments about their budget. So there's no more questions about, I don't know what my budget is, I don't know if I can spend or overspending. And this has helped us keep us within our guardrails. February 22nd is where we sit today. Board of Education Finance Subcommittee. And then February through March is the release of the audit, hopefully the acceptance by the board. And we wanted to point that out because it's really important as far as our budget forecasting. Do you want to talk a little bit about why?
Yeah, absolutely. Robert Martinez, Chief Financial Officer, for the record. But with our audit, we have to make sure that we have a sustainable budget, with cash balance moving forward as well, and that we're able to project, the cash throughout as we move throughout crossing fiscal years, really. But adding to what Superintendent said on January 29th and February 8th, what we also did with the school site and department meetings was we provided a mid-year budget review for their budget to see where they were at, to let them know, remind them of the spending deadlines. That way, they would spend and utilize their budgets before any money got reverted or rolled over to cash. So in that, like Superintendent Chavez said, yes, we did look at projections as well for next year, but it was also a mid-year budget review for them to see where they were standing today. But the release of the audit and the acceptance by the board, is upcoming. Release of the audit would probably be by the end of next week, which is great, but it's an annual requirement.
And then March 20th through the 22nd, Spring Budget Workshop. And then the following months is when we'll start to develop the budget presentation to include study session and upcoming board meetings. This was just a little snapshot of what has happened in fiscal year 23 and 24 of the due dates of our budget to be submitted to the Public Education Department. For some reason, it's always at 8 a.m. which is always a little strange. And want to thank Robert and his department over the last 2 years, because it does take 10 to 14 business days to upload all of the templates and the budget for review by PED. So there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes after the Board of Education approves the budget to get it uploaded, submitted to the state of New Mexico. Slide, yep, thank you. This was just to kind of recap what we discussed on January 13th at a board retreat, just some of the following priorities and how it could tie in potentially to the discussion tonight and where we might want to start to dive into a little deeper. So again, I'm not going to go over this because that was part of the discussion that we all had together that evening. So that is just to bring back forward what we discussed during the board retreat.
So in talking about spring budget workshop, Superintendent Chavez mentioned that we'll be attending that March 20th through the 22nd. And really what that provides is, in the following, how to build out the operating budget. When we talk about the operating budget, that includes operational, our capital outlay, debt service, grants, documents that accompany the budget submission, such as OBMS and COA updates. The OBMS is the operating budget management system that the PED uses. So we have financial software in the district, so our financial software has to tie to the OBMS system. So whatever we do, when you all approve bars and consent, the bars are entered in OBMS, and then after they're approved by the board and by the PED, then we enter them into our financial software, so making sure they align. And the COA, that's the chart of accounts update. So that's our guidelines for our accounts, how account strings come about. Office of the State Auditor updates, those are really, really important, especially as we've encountered new GASB requirements. Every year there seems to be new additions, which the district has handled really well. We have been able to maintain the requirements of the state auditor. Program and grant requirements, including the RFR process, those are our requests for reimbursements. I'm sure you all have heard the auditor and myself and the superintendent talk about the RFR process and how long they can remain outstanding. But it's important for the district staff, program coordinators, to know about the grant requirements, the spending ability of the grants, and how to get the reimbursements submitted and reimbursed 100%, because if not, then they have to be pulled from operational cash at that point. Instructional hours in the school calendar, capital outlay, PSCOC, PSFA, and the RFR process for those funds. That's like the public school capital outlay and the public school facilities capital outlay. Transportation budget process and guidance on new legislation, student nutrition budget process, and also the RFR process for the federal awards that come from student nutrition. Bilingual multicultural education programs, data reporting and submitting annual expenditure reports, the uniform chart of accounts updates to ensure compliance with GASB and NCES. NIMSIA risk and benefit updates and premiums. This one is really important. This is if there's going to be any increases to health insurance, to retirement, which we do see that usually annually, but we usually get the updates there from NIMSIA themselves about how to build your budgets around that based on the percentage that it's increasing. Instructional materials, annual reports, and the statutory purchasing requirements for that fund as well. So spring budget workshop continued. Why is this important? This workshop ensures that our budgets are submitted in accordance with all the new legislation. As Superintendent Chavez mentioned, we're kind of at a standstill until we go through spring budget workshop, and now that the legislative session has ended, we know kind of what direction to go towards, but this is the conference that ties up all those loose ends for us together, for us to move forward and prepare our budget. Address the unit value and the 910B5 weights that drive our SEG, or the State Equalization Guarantee. Reminder, the 910B5 is it's our tool for what our SEG is. It includes our membership, it includes TCI, which is Teacher Cost Index, Bilingual Multicultural, Fine Arts, PE, National Board Certified Teacher, Special Ed, several indicators and weights on there that formulate out what the SEG is, and that would be our operational revenue. And that we stay in alignment with new processes and requirements, so grant and capital outlay funding remains 100% reimbursable. I mentioned that beforehand. Provide information on how districts are to build their budgets, include meeting statutory requirements for salary and benefit increases. We will talk about that percentage in a later slide. Adhere to formats for uploading the Santa Fe Public School budget into OBMS and the COA allowables, and meet statutory deadlines for when the budget must be approved by the board and is due to the New Mexico Public Education Department.
All right, so taking us through House Bill 2, and I surprised her today. I said, I think you need to talk to us about House Bill 2 because Chief of Staff Ruth Williams is our legislative hawk. She's the one that keeps us informed. So when we were going over this budget, we said there's nobody better to really explain to us the ins and outs. Plus, you know, she worked with Dr. Garcia not only here in Santa Fe, but with the Public Education Department. So she knows everything that goes on during the session and also behind the scenes.
Okay, I think I need
The mic.
Okay, so the legislative session is finally over, which is a good thing. And now we're waiting on the governor to act by signing off on the bills that have been passed by March the 6th. The big one that we're looking at is House Bill 2, which came out of the Senate with some changes over what happened in the House. And so now the governor has them under advisement. But we provided for you kind of groupings of how some of these appropriations fall out. And of course, anything can happen. The governor can do a lot of veto if she wants to. Under attendance, we saw $5 million for attendance improvement interventions. This is something that we've been very interested in because we've been carrying our attendance coaches and so forth out of ESSER. $5 million, as Larry and I and others were talking about today, you might not go very far when it comes to getting distributed across the state. There is $500,000 to implement provisions of the Black Education Act. This is one of the multicultural pieces that did go through. There were other pieces that did not go through, such as the funding for the Yazzie Martinez initiatives that would have helped improve the number of bilingual teachers and so forth in the state. That got stuck.
Yeah, anytime.
Can I ask a quick question? That's $500 for the whole state.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, $500,000.
That would be probably what you were seeing there would be small grants.
Okay.
You know, operating the office, you know, that sort of thing.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
And then there's $59 million appropriation that included teacher mentorship, creating district educational plans, scientifically based literacy programs, providing career tech ed, and implementing community schools framework. So you'll see this $59 million showing up under more than one heading here, but it's yet to be seen how that's all going to roll out for all of those things. But there was another $8 million for community school and family engagement initiatives.
And that one, we've been pushing the state to really increase their investment because we're going to be talking about that. When that grant for community schools expires, it's going to be up to the school district to absorb those costs if you want to continue with community schools, right? So that's something that we need to continue to educate our state leaders to really provide that additional funding once that initial grant expires, and that grant's for 3 years.
Okay, then on the next page under educators, there is a 3% salary increase for all public school personnel, and this does include transportation. You know, we had in our legislative platform that we wanted to see an increase in hourly pay for, you know, transportation drivers, but they will be seeing that 3% increase. Again, under teacher mentorship, you find that $59 million. There's $5 million for school leader professional development. This would be principals, assistant principals, that sort of thing. $5 million for stipends and pay differentials for hard to staff special education positions. On this one, they moved this one through for more than one fiscal year. They have it for 3 fiscal years. So that's their way to kind of bridge the problems that many districts are facing on staffing special ed.
And if you remember, for us to staff our behavior programs, we had to provide those incentives. So we're hoping to tap into this funding source so we can continue to provide those incentives for our behavior room teachers and EAs. So then that one was very important to us. We'll see when the rules come out on how to access it, but that could be something for us to really tap into to provide those stipends.
And is the hope to keep the stipend? I don't have my mic on, I'm sorry.
Is the hope to keep the stipend the same as we did this year?
Yeah,
Okay.
and that's always negotiated with the union.
Okay.
So some of these are 1-year things, and you said a couple.
This one under stipends, they did put it in for 3 years.
Okay, and that's 3 years.
Yeah.
But a bunch, if I'm just wondering sort of what the lag time will be,
Well,
and
you know,
if they'll be useful in the next budget year. I mean, we can't really budget on any of this.
you can't because, you know, when the money comes out of its categorical,
Yeah.
then, you know, it has to go through a process of RFP and that kind of thing. But we will wait and see.
And that's
And-
why our budget continues to grow, because when the money's there to access, could be, I was gonna say July, but August, September, December, January, it all depends, right? That might even be
August would
soon.
be great.
Yeah, let's do August.
New awards come throughout the year because different entities operate on different fiscal year calendars as well. And then not only do new awards come throughout the year, but also carryover from previous years when there are grants or awards that are tied to multi-fiscal years. So we do see that just throughout the fiscal year.
Yeah, and I should say that 5 million for stipends is 5 million each of those 3 fiscal years. Okay, not spread out. Then 5 million for teacher professional development. Then under the education, you have 20 million for the Indian Education Fund. Now, there was a bill that was presented and did not pass the night before the end of the session, House Bill 134, that would have set up the Tribal Education Trust Fund, and I guess there were some disagreements about how that was supposed to happen, and so the sponsor pulled it. But it was 400 million. But there's 50 million in House Bill 2 right now for the Tribal Education Trust Fund, and I talked with our dear expert Josh over here, and I said, now, if the governor wants to strike out the contingency language, which is in House Bill 2, it says it depends on the passage of 134, and leave that 50 million in there, can she do it? And he said, yes. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. But that money would go to tribal schools.
Just to tribal schools, not
Yeah.
to our school for Indian education. Okay.
Be going to tribal schools, and there's some stipulations in that on what that money would be for. I thought I had a note about it, but I don't see it. Okay, then under reading, we see that 59 million again. We don't know how it's going to shake out. There's 30 million for a summer reading intervention program based on the science of reading.
But I just want to add to that. I know public education department's looking for school districts to be partners. They want to be able to provide, if I remember correctly, reading intervention over the summer for 10,000 students statewide. And so they're looking for partners. They'll provide the training, they'll provide the funding and the stipend. So that may be something we consider adding to our summer programming,
Yeah,
because this would be at the cost of the state.
that would be really cool. I bet we could do some really creative things to get kids interested in doing the reading
Well,
programs.
And we did have that pilot, Deputy Superintendent Romero, for struggling readers last year. And what we did identify is if students attended that camp for 95% of the time or more, and I think it was a 4 or 5 week camp, 4 week, we saw almost a year's worth of reading growth, literacy growth. Those that attended hit and miss, you saw the growth, but not to the extent when they were there 95% of the time or more. So I think this could provide the students an opportunity to gain years, a year or two, or maybe more, of progress in literacy.
I have a couple questions on that just because reading fascinates me. Are those kinds of interventions, are they targeted specifically at students who are not yet proficient? They're not for students who are like increasing levels for students who are already proficient.
So the summer camp that we had, our focus was those kids that were reading below, but we
Okay.
didn't deny other families
Sure.
that were interested in it.
Okay, cool.
And then we'll wait for PED to come out with what their framework's going to look like
Okay.
to see how it fits our students.
Okay, cool. And the sciences of reading is what you currently using.
Structured literacy.
Okay, cool.
Okay, then there's 14 million for early literacy and reading support, and 5 million to train secondary teachers on evidence-based reading instruction.
So just want to make note, and Deputy Superintendent could correct me if I'm wrong. Right now it's K through 3rd or 4th grade.
That we're providing.
Yeah.
It's 4th grade.
4th grade. They're moving it into the middle school. So what that also means is more PD, more training, on top of everything going on. So again, you're going to see the expansion of the early literacy training the state's providing, and now it's going to hit middle schools.
So they're statutorily saying that it has to go into middle schools? Okay, so we're gonna have to change
And
up
if
to do
I
that.
remember the numbers, we had close to 50 teachers and administrators who have completed it, but we have over 220, 240 teachers, administrators, and district staff going through the training and the professional development provided by the state.
And are we?
Sorry,
No,
I
you go ahead.
apologize. It's an 8-unit training that they go through, so it's pretty time consuming. So they're completing this like after hours, and so we're paying teachers to complete it.
Got it. And are we paying for that from our funds? Okay, the state's not. Okay.
Okay, then under special education, there's $6 million for the implementation of special education initiatives by PED. So they have a new director of special education, and I think this is to support kind of initiatives she wants to do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the next page under students, you see that $59 million again. There's also $55 million for school districts and charter schools to purchase culturally and linguistically appropriate instructional materials, including dual credit instructional materials and educational technology. There's $41 million for student nutrition and wellness, $40 million for pilot programs, including for career tech student organizations, innovation zones, work-based learning initiatives, and equipment. And included in that $40 million, we have $5 million for summer internships.
Can I ask a quick question about the student nutrition and wellness? Is that funding for the free lunches, or is that separate?
That was for the.
I think it's to bolster, because one of the things
Okay.
that happened
Yep.
in House Bill 2, it started out on the House side, and they put in almost $10 million because of what appeared to be some sort of shortfall in
Okay.
providing universal free meal coverage through the Healthy Hunger Free Students Bill of Rights Act. Then when it moved over to the Senate, it doubled to
Okay.
almost $20 million. And I heard in committee that they wanted to make sure they had enough money for that.
Yep.
Okay,
So it was a current shortfall this school year,
Okay.
and so they're trying to make up. for
So
that.
what you have is, you have this 41 million, plus in the bill is nearly 20 million for this shortfall.
Okay.
Okay, then under the 15 million for out of school learning, summer enrichment and tutoring. So when this bill crossed over to the Senate added this in. And what they want inside of that 15 million is for 8.5 million to be used for high dosage tutoring. And then there's 10 million to support schools with the highest ranked family income index, which has been important to our district for some of our schools. Okay. And then under technology, there's 2.3 million for the learning management system. When the bill, House Bill 2, was heard on the House side, the vote was to support an amendment. So it's stated right there that money appropriated to PED should not be used to enforce or implement any rule establishing a minimum requirement of 180 days. So the comment was made on the floor, that's just going to get line item vetoed. And the legislator said, but it sends our message, it conveys our message about that. So again, the governor has until Wednesday, March 6th to act on the bill. An individual item can be line item vetoed. There were some real big increases that occurred when the House version went over to the Senate. And I thought that was kind of interesting to watch the dynamic there. I mean, the 59 million I keep referring to started out as 49 million. The 41 million for student nutrition and wellness started out as 21 million. And the summer reading intervention program started out as 15 million and went to 30. So there was some real thinking going on there about trying to give us adequate funding and things. So
That's great. Could I ask just one question before we move to Capital Alley? Just in the special education section, what kind of new initiatives are they thinking about? Do we know?
Not at this point. That's something that I'm sure we'll possibly hear at spring budget workshop.
Okay.
But again, this is that new department that
Right.
the executive developed, and so we're still trying to learn and change and evolve with them because there are going to be new expectations and developments. But we're looking forward to it, and they've been a good partner of ours so far.
the next page is capital outlay. And we put in some requests, big requests, for money, 3.8 million for our electric school buses and that sort of thing. I want to say that the bill on electric buses didn't come out of the session passing. But there was also the request to build employee housing at 10 to 15 million. And so what came out of it was 750,000, which brings you to 1.5 million over 2 years for employee housing. And then Senate Bill 246 was a capital outlay reauthorizations bill that reauthorized the funding for upgrades to the district-wide area network in this building and a preschool and the DX Young building. So they've extended that money through 2026. But what's important about this bill is that when it was in the Senate Finance Committee and also when it was discussed on the floor, the head of Senate Finance, Senator George Munoz, said he's not going to bring another capital outlay reauthorization bill back. And so that, if that's the case, we just need to be aware of spending these dollars. And for instance, the money that we got last session for housing, I think it expires in 2027. So we want to, keep our eye on that.
I have to say, I'm disappointed in the amount of capital outlay that we received, not through any of falling down of our efforts, but I just wish, looking at what we requested, I know you're never going to get everything that you requested, but I would have loved to see more of an investment in workforce housing. Of course, this money has to go to lots of different people and there's lots of different ways. But I just wonder if maybe we think about our TAC for capital outlay next year. Seeing what soccer got, which is amazing. That's great that they're going to improve
With the dome.
Yeah. Well, for the
MRC.
Yeah. Well, in the School for the Arts, this is an interesting thing because they got 2.3 million for dormitories in House Bill 2, and it was general fund dollars. And I saw another one in there, but it was noting capital outlay was what was funding it. But I thought that was an interesting one. And they also got capital dollars, the School for the Arts. So we might want to think about, if they're going to start putting capital projects in House Bill 2, that might be an avenue.
How we can work on that.
And Board President Anderson, I do know that when I began at the district 6 years ago, legislative appropriations was something that I specifically did. And I know Board Member Noble has been on that long. We did used to receive several appropriations, up to 30, but they were very small funding amounts of $10,000. And it's really tough because it holds the district's feet to the fire to do that project.
Right.
But it only pays for a very small percentage.
Right.
And a lot of those initiatives were not budgeted for, so we were constantly having to find other funding sources or dip into cash.
Yeah.
So I think what the district did moving forward in the last couple of years was we tried to minimize our requests, but increase really what we were asking for to get us closer to fully funded initiatives.
That makes a ton of sense to me to focus it on just a few projects.
And we'll see what happens with what Senator Munoz said he would do, because during that discussion on the floor, Senator Ortiz-Pino said, well, you can't just say that blanket. You're not going to do something about reauthorizations because there may be a very legitimate reason as to why the projects have not moved forward. I did want to just tell you very quickly while we're on the topic that your local solar access fund, House Bill 108, did not make it through the House appropriations. House Bill 127, age 21 for firearm purchases, was never heard in the House. It's been around on that calendar forever. And the pension structures bills didn't make it out of the House and Senate either. I mentioned the Yazzie Martinez lawsuit bill was never heard in House Appropriations and Finance. And the class loads bills, what they did was they passed a memorial instead to study it through the LESC.
Okay, I didn't see that memorial. That's better than nothing.
So current driving factors, always based on enrollment. So 40th day, our first reporting period to the state of New Mexico, we had an enrollment of 10,794. 80th day, we saw a slight dip of 8 students, but then it's unconfirmed. It's still pending with the public education department. We saw growth of 859 students. And it's important because our funding is an average of 80th and 120th day. So that is funding for next year based on these two numbers. That is also includes ridership. So what that means is those that are riding public school transportation. This current year, 23-24, we were funded off of 10,946. So just kind of giving you guys, some numbers to see where we're at and where we could see a dip or an increase. Ridership has doubled. We submitted that to the state of New Mexico during these reporting periods, and it looks like our ridership is a little over 6,000 students that are riding transportation. So even though we had to pause 7 routes, it looks like ridership is still up, which really helps the transportation department balance their budget and be able to provide, sustainable staffing patterns and also other things that go into transportation.
The initial and the final unit value is 6,241.67. There was no change to the unit value this year. So what the impact is, the unit value, that is multiplied by all the weights in the 910B5. So that would be in the calculation of our SEG. The unit value does not affect other funds such as student nutrition, capital outlay. It's only specific to the SEG. In my 6 years here at the district, this is the first time that I have not seen a change to the unit value. Usually you see that when you approve an increase budget bar to the operational fund. It has been historically happened before that there was a decrease and we would have to pay that back. So thankfully, that was not the case this year. But the initial unit value is usually released right before or at spring budget workshop. And the final unit value usually comes about in February.
And with this, through the CBA, it's negotiated in at some point in time. When we see an increase, especially with the unit value mid-year, we always have to negotiate that with the union. So it's one of those things that's in our CBA.
And
go ahead.
And the TCI, the teacher cost index, there was a slight decrease from 1.097 in the current year to what's projected for next year, or what we are going to have as our TCI next year, 1.093. That small percentage, there's a lot of funding that happens in a very small change. But I know Howard will talk more about the TCI later on, or are you going to do that now?
Right now.
Okay.
Teacher cost index is reimbursement we get from the PED based on level of licensure of the teachers and their years of experience. It's a change over the last couple of years from an older system where it was just based on the degree level of the teacher and years of experience. So an 8-year master's degree teacher could be a level 2 or a level 3 teacher, and they were getting funded the same no matter what level they were. That could be a $10,000 difference in our cost. So we're happy to have this teacher cost index approach to it. And as Robert stated, it's a slight decrease, but we don't know exactly what the dollar amount of that will be yet.
So it provides a better funding mechanism to really support, our budget, because now if somebody has a level 3, we're receiving that funding for a level 3 teacher. And then we threw in here because at the end of every fiscal year, all of our positions, our FTEs, are tied to budget, and so at the end of every year, the vacancy, what we call vacancy savings, roll into our budget for the upcoming year. So last year, May 30th of 23, we ended in these specific areas with 7 EAs vacancies, 7 special ed EA, 11 special ed EA vacancies, and 78 teacher vacancies. Currently, to this date, we only have 4 EA vacancies, 7 special ed EA vacancies, and we're just under 23 vacancies for teachers. So made a really good impact on filling those positions, also retaining. I just spoke to Executive Director of Student Wellness, Sue O'Brien, and she said she has seen an uptick in nurses that are applying with us.
That's
so, that's great. We're starting to see progress. I know it's taken about 3 years since we returned from virtual learning, but we're starting to see people coming back to the workforce.
That's great. Good hours for nurses, for school nurses.
Yeah. Then on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit. I know we have an item a little later, and we would ask the board to adopt it, not approve it, but adopt the calendar we're going to propose. This is a very what we're calling flexible calendar for the upcoming school year. Deputy Superintendent Romero led a committee that was required by one of our board policies to include district staff, site administrators, teachers, parents, and even some community members. So she put that together. They worked on it because, again, it's still a little bit in limbo on whether or not the state's going to require 180 days. We're currently sitting at 174 instructional days on our current calendar. And so that's what we kind of based it off of. But we'll go into why we're calling it a flexible calendar and why we wanted to bring this forward, because we're getting calls already. When does school start and when does it end? So we really use that as our framework to develop this calendar.
And so our role in this is ensuring that our instructional hours and the calendar matches what the state is requiring of us. We did want to ensure that our start date would remain the same, even if we go to 180 days, which is being proposed and is still on the table. But this calendar does reflect 174 instructional days, with the start date on August 9th. What we want to do is, if we move to 180 days, we built in some extra holidays in the calendar so that if we do move to 180, we can easily take those holidays out so that it's not a huge impact to teachers and staff at the school site.
And we're really not changing when we start or when we end. And I think that's important to the community to know those two dates, because other than that, that's why we called it flexible. If we go to 180, we can pluck from within the meat of it.
Can I ask a question about the hours versus the days? So if they increase to 180 days, they're not increase. Are they increasing instructional hours?
So looking at our minutes, we are going to have to increase five minutes Monday through Thursday for elementary, and 5 minutes on our Friday early release to ensure that we're meeting the instructional hours.
And the reason why is currently 1140 hours that were required. You can include, so it's inclusive of professional development hours. If this proposed rule gets announced, you're removing those PD embedded hours, and it must be 1140 of instructional time with PD on top. So they're taking that out. You must go to 180 as well. So that's why we've said this is a flexible calendar in order to meet current statute and possibly the changes that could be announced.
Yeah, totally. I'm not suggesting we change the calendar in any way, shape, or form. I think you guys have done a great job building that. And I know we've talked about this before. It's just such a long day for the lower elementary in particular. I don't know about middle school and high school, but that's just what I've heard from the younger kids. So I wonder if we do that, if there's a way to build SEL into the day itself.
We do currently all of our elementary schools. We follow second step curriculum in elementary, and so there are required blocks of SEL in our elementaries. And we're also doing it in high schools because the days did get longer for high school. And so
the first
like
15 minutes.
20 minutes.
It's hard. I know you guys are doing the best you can.
And it's, that fine line, because people want their summer vacation. We get that. And, Santa Fe's a tourism city based on it. However, we also have to negotiate that with the union, the teacher's contract, and we don't want to, put a lot of wear and tear on them as well. So it's that fine line, and we've heard it this year as well, that some of the days are long. And so that's why, again, I think it's also important to have those early release days, because it does kind of shorten, that week.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
And is this the time to ask how many snow days are built into this calendar?
Two.
The question no one wants to ask.
Yes, 2.
Okay.
So far, but we still have to go through negotiations, and that starts in April. But again, the start date does not change. You can see the days that we would have to pluck up if we have to go to 180. And again, if we go to 180, just rough calculations on current unit value, current budget, we would want, and ask for 4.5 to 5.5 million, because we would need to make up that time in teacher's contract.
Can they give it to us?
We'll wait and see.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So we have a number, right? So whatever we're talking about now, we know that we would need roughly $5 million in additional revenue to make up the instructional time, because it really does cost a little above $700,000 a day to operate the district.
Yeah.
Can I make a request slash suggestion if this calendar does have to be modified? I think that in the current year calendar, the October autumnal break was very convenient, very appropriately scheduled around Rosh Hashanah.
Yep.
And so cutting, if you had to cut one of those days in October, the 14th would be better than the 11th, because the 11th is the holiday.
I think cutting Indigenous Peoples Day is,
Oh, shoot, that is what that is.
yeah.
I thought they were combined.
We could
Yeah.
take a look.
I mean,
I would look
I'm not saying
elsewhere then. Yes.
we should not compete Rosh Hashanah against
No, no.
Indigenous peoples,
We
but
could take
yeah.
a look.
Yeah, let's just be mindful
Yeah.
when we collapse those days
Yeah.
that
You know,
not
if that
target any group.
if that rule change comes up, we'll make sure that we scrub the calendar and take a look at it.
Yeah. You were gonna say something, I'm sorry.
We did have a member from the Jewish community
Yeah.
on the calendar committee.
Oh, great.
And this conversation did come up, and she said that October 11th isn't necessarily the right date, and so I guess the holiday falls on like the week before or on a different date, and so she said it, you know, we'd have to look at the correct date.
Oh, does that maybe start that day so it starts at sundown? I don't have my calendar open.
We could
I'm
take
sorry.
a look if they have
Yeah.
to propose, if they propose that calendar
Yeah.
change.
That sounds good.
So again, flexible.
I
We
started
we did want to make sure that start and end dates were sort of in concrete, so at least our community knows what that looks like.
Okay, cool.
And also, NEA Santa Fe was part of the calendar committee, so they were part of this discussion. So again, a little later on the agenda, just adoption and exception or accepting the proposed calendar.
Just because I pulled my calendar out, I know we'll talk about the calendar later, but just since we're talking
Yeah.
about it now, then it saves time later. The 11th is Yom Kippur Eve, so Yom Kippur would start that night at sundown, and then Rosh Hashanah is the 3rd and the 4th, so the Thursday and Friday prior to that. So I would assume like folks don't have those days off, but they are excused absences per the
Correct.
board policy.
Correct.
Yeah. Do we do no testing days on those days?
Typically, like state testing doesn't
Yeah,
really
state
happen.
doesn't happen then. Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
And I'm not asking to change board policy. I just want to, remind everybody, even with excused absences,
I know.
it counts towards the Attendance for Success Act in
I know.
a negative way.
I know.
Yeah, I should have made a more general statement. Let's just be mindful
Yeah.
when we're cutting days that
Yeah.
we're.
All right.
So mill levy and the general obligation bond, I'll start with mill levy and then I'll hand it over to Deputy Superintendent Yonda Wagner. But mill levy consists of SB 9 and HB 33. Usually what those funds are used for is building maintenance, safety and security, custodial technology. We see various school site requests if there's a need that comes up throughout the year. SB 9 passed in November of 2023, and that's a $13 million anticipated new revenue. HB 33 passed in 2021, and that's an anticipated $8.5 million new revenue. Of course, sometimes our budgets for each of those funds are a little bit more. Once the audit is released, we'll be able to roll forward any funds in all of our funds that have rollover to true up the general ledger. So as those have cash balances, they would roll forward and increase or decrease based on what revenue was projected, those budgets.
I'm Deputy Superintendent Christy Wagner. We'll be going out for our second to last bond sale for it's supposed to be the 2021, bond. But is it spring?
It's summer that we will sell.
This summer we'll sell our next 28 million, and you'll see an outline of the projects that we prioritized for this bond sale. In addition, we'll continue project completion on those sites still in progress. and begin preliminary planning for our final bond sale. We're gearing up for our next GEO bond election in 2025. And though that's not highlighted here, it's worth noting we've been told that we can plan on a bonding capacity of 140 million, which is a 40% increase, and obviously very welcome in this economic climate.
The only thing I'll add about the GEO bond for 2021 that will be sold this summer, we're working on that with our bonding agents and our underwriters. So there's going to be things forthcoming between agendas soon throughout the summer for that process. So when you see them, that is reflective on the 28 million that we're anticipating to sell. So the mill levy spending by object category, this gives you just a percentage breakdown of where a majority of the spending goes between HB 33 and SB 9. So if you'll see, the biggest percentage goes to maintenance and repair. That is maintenance and repair of property, plant, equipment, vehicles. 17% goes to construction. That could be on-call construction. That could be small construction projects. Maybe if we had a legislative appropriation that wasn't fully funded, the mill levy would absorb the difference to complete that. Material and supply assets, that could be anything that we experience, from maybe faucets to sinks to things that we have of that nature. Then we have 10% is into software. So technology, as I mentioned, also uses mill levy for this, but it's not just technology. There's other sites and departments that utilize mill levy, such as music education has a software out of mill levy as well. Then we have 4% for professional services. Those could be contracts or contractual work. And then we have a small percentage for fixed assets, which is about 500,000, but that could be furniture if it's above $5,000 per item. We usually see that in our kitchens, whether it's a stove, heated cabinet, those types of things. So that's really a breakdown of where the mill levy spending is really geared to by object.
Good evening, Neil Weaver, Chief Information and Strategy Officer. Three of the primary funding sources that I'll talk about tonight are EdTech Note, Emergency Connectivity Funding, and E-Rate. As you know, EdTech Note covers three primary things: our infrastructure, technology, equipment, and the support of those. We, in 2023-24, is our last year of the current ETN cycle, and we just recently passed the next 5-year $55 million, which will take us through school year 28-29. And that budget has been created. It's just being formalized and refined. But again, infrastructure, technology, equipment, and support are the three primary roles of the use for EdTech Note. Emergency connectivity funding was put in place in order to help when we're in remote learning. The district was able to capitalize on $3.6 million in reimbursements, and we're looking for another $250,000 reimbursement, which is outstanding. We primarily use this for student devices, the ability for students to connect from home with hotspots, and for bus Wi-Fi as well. The ability to leverage ECF for these items allowed us to use some flexibility with our funding to pursue some alternative projects. We have electric vans for our technicians. We're putting a emergency generator like the one that powers this building over at the technology campus, and the BF Young infrastructure is being updated as we speak. And then the last little piece is E-Rate. E-Rate is another federal fund, primarily for connectivity. There's two categories, Category A and Category B. In 2023-24, about $460,000 is what we have been reimbursed. And for the next school year, we're looking at approximately $600,000 worth of reimbursements. The way those work, the district pays for E-rate projects up front, and then we're reimbursed 80% from the federal government. There's an additional 10% that comes from the state typically. So we're reimbursed 90% of what we spend. And these are primarily projects involving our schools, so wireless access points and controllers, UPSs, which are basically large battery backups for when the network goes, or for when the power goes out, so that the network does not go down, and other network equipment.
So our federal stimulus, or what we call our ESSER funding, currently potential rollover is about 3.8 million. So we've really whittled it down to only those projects that are producing results and that are really needed, such as summer programming, student travel. You can see some of the items on there. Staff visa support, which is the support we provide our employees that are on a work visa. Sometimes they can't afford some of that legal assistance, so that's something that we do for them. Big one, second year in a row, we do not have any bilingual vacancies, and I think it was because we provide the funding for them to get their transcripts reviewed, to go through the testing or any classes that are required. So that's been a great asset to us, and we just passed that resolution from the steering committee, the reimagining steering committee. So that could be something that we also continue to move as we go forward. Current trend with our budget and projections for next year is that they're very favorable in order to absorb that 3.8 million. Now, again, that is not a concrete number. We're still scrubbing. We're still taking a look at it. But again, that's something that we're in a good position to absorb and move forward because, as I mentioned earlier, I've been reading a lot of articles. They didn't do this type of planning, so they're starting off this budget season in a deficit because they paid for additional salary stipends. So there could be some in other districts, not maybe even in New Mexico, but outside of the state, jobs that are being cut, programs that are being cut. So I think right now, exam fees, that's a big one. AP exam fees at Santa Fe High, Mandela IB exam fees is another big one. So we've really covered a lot, travel for DECA, hosts on music, etc. So you just get kind of a glimpse at what we've used and how we've been able to make an impact, in our district with staff and students.
Okay, moving on to cash balance history. I'm going to start by giving just a very hopefully simple example of what the difference is between cash balance and what cash on hand is. Because you'll see there's multiple fiscal years spread out, and I just want you to see where we've been over the last several years. But the difference between cash balance and cash on hand is say that you have $10,000 in your savings account, and a friend asks you to borrow $5,000. You have $5,000 at that point cash on hand. When you get that loan paid back, you're going to have $10,000, but until then, you only have $5,000 as your cash on hand. So looking at 2019, the cash balance percentage was 7%, cash on hand was 1%. The difference in that is usually in outstanding loans. Those are known as RFRs. So every single federal grant award, we front the money on reimbursable basis. Most of our awards are reimbursable. So we front the money out of operational, and then we submit the reimbursement to the PED or to the grantor, and it's reimbursed. Sometimes that can take anywhere from 30 to 60 day standard. We've seen them go 6 months. So crossing the fiscal years is tough. And I know that the auditors have had the conversation with the audit committee and with the board about cash on hand increasing. So as we look through, 2020 and 2021, the board had agreed to dip into cash during the pandemic to get some things underway or some things funded before we had any pandemic relief funds. Our cash balance at that point was 4%. Cash on hand was 1 to 2% between 2020 and 2021. 2022, we did move our cash balance percentage up, but we ended the year in 2022 and 2023 with 0% cash on hand, which is really tough. We do receive the SEG monthly, so that 134 million that we receive from the SEG based on the 910B5, that comes in 12-month installments. So we receive it every month. And what the auditors really want, and what I would love to see, I'm sure you all would love to see it, is that we're not needing SEG to come in to make payroll, to make AP, because there have been instances where we've really been gritting our teeth. 2024, what our projected cash balance is expected to be is 8% and cash on hand about 3%. That just really depends, like Superintendent was just talking about ESSER, when the reimbursements can go out and how quickly the PED is turning those back around to the district. But that's the cash balance history that the district had. I know, we always try and stay within 5%, but really building that back out, it takes some time, and increasing your cash balance is what increases your cash on hand. I mentioned earlier too that
And Robert,
operational
Just briefly, our policy is around cash balance, right?
cash balance, correct.
And something that we changed last year, because it wasn't in compliance with the CBA, was the way we used summer payroll. And so we went back to the CBA because, Board Member Noble probably remembers this for many years, summer payroll was, the most stressful time. We didn't know if we were going to make summer payroll. And so going back and following the CBA has provided us that flexibility to meet summer payroll, accounts payable, and stay within that agreement. So we've gone back to what's in the CBA, and I think it's providing us a lot more relief as we go into each and every summer.
And
And our cash balance policy is 5%, and
5%.
what's the state requirement?
I believe it's
5%.
5%.
It's 5.
Yeah. And as I mentioned previously, with the SEG, we get it in 12 payments. Usually June and July are a little late. June they were on time with this year. July they were plus was a couple weeks late. So that really creates even a hardship for us, as well. But that, with increasing cash balance and cash on hand, would help us continue to get through it even when SEG is dispersed late. I mentioned previously the SEG is the only fund that you can borrow from. So, last year I know when the board approved the budget and when we looked at the budget, we made budgeting cash a non-negotiable to get back up. Just a history for you all, in 2019 our SEG was operational was 114 million. 2020 was 121.7 million. 2021 was 115.5 million. 2022 was 124.3 million. 2023 was 128.6 million, and 2024 we're currently at 141.7 million. So the good thing is with looking at a cash balance projected at about 8%, we're hoping our SEG increases, but if we're able to maintain that standard, we would not have to pull out SEG money from next year to meet cash because we were able to stay within our budget this year and hold true to that. So it already sets us in a better place budgeting next year, to where we're not starting next year with pooling such a huge amount.
And that's why we said, our trajectory to absorb ESSER is in a good position because of that cash. Yeah, and I know that's something that I know you've been part of the audit for years. That's been a discussion with many members who have come and gone. And so I think we've done a good job. And if you guys remember, I said, take 2 or 3 years to get us to this position, and we'll continue to build. And I think we're on the right path.
So the current fiscal year 24 budget is at $418 million, as Superintendent mentioned previously. So our operational, which is our SEG ad valorem, we have some instructional material rollover from our previous fiscal year, but that's about $143.8 million. We have pupil transportation, which is at $3.4 million. I know the superintendent mentioned previously that ridership has been up, so we're really hopeful to see that allocation increase next year. Pupil transportation is a fund that is awarded on an allocation basis. It's not a reimbursement or a revenue basis. It's an allocation that they give us up front. A couple of years ago, I know that had increased. That fund did see an increase. We haven't seen like an increase or a decrease in that fund throughout a middle of a fiscal year since then. Student nutrition, 6 million is what they're currently budgeted right now. Student nutrition is a revenue-based fund. It's not an allocation-based fund. So student nutrition is looking that their revenue would maintain the same next fiscal year. We have athletics and activities. Athletics also has money budgeted in operational, but that athletic fund is where the revenue goes from gate receipts and those types of events. But athletics and activity funds, each school has activity funds, whether it's a sunshine fund, whether it's a club fund. That's about 3.379 million.
We've worked hard with the support and leadership of Deputy Superintendent Wagner in cleaning up these, because that was a lot of the audit findings in the past, and we've cleaned up a lot of those things. So we keep working towards clean audit, and I think we're making progress.
Yeah, every year we make a lot of progress. Our grants and awards are at 43.6 million. Those are really crucial to absorbing any of the gaps that we're experiencing, or any of the shortfalls that we may experience, or new initiatives that we want to experience, or that we're trying to push out as well. Capital outlay, that consists of mill levy, ETN, GO bond, SB9 state match. That's 120.4 million. Debt service, that's our principal and interest, 97 million. We pay principal, interest, and agent fees in August, and in February we only pay interest and agent fees. But that is what the total FY24 budget is to date.
Can I ask a question about grants and awards? Just because I'm not sure how those work with schools. So do those mostly cover new initiatives, or can they cover things like FTEs and like more
Some.
operational?
Some it can. This is ongoing, district-wide, but also site-based. We just received a grant from PED for Kearney Elementary, and we're just notified today. So I know that number is going to change because that allocation was about 25,000. So it's site-based. It's also district-wide. You can have FTE in there. We try not to, but again, it all depends on what that grant or award is tailored to.
Okay. And are the sites writing the grant? Are they finding the grants themselves?
Some.
Okay.
Some, and then they get support from the district,
Okay.
so we're aware of what's going on, so we can support them, maybe even write a letter of recommendation, but also to really help them in the guidance with the financial piece, right? We don't want them to spend the grant or award on something that's outside of the realm, but also not to have recurring costs that may be coming and hitting operational at some point in the future, because something that we worked on over 2 years was really cleaning up ESSER. There was a lot of FTEs in ESSER, and we knew that was a recurring cost, and we were trying to really remove those and put those over the last 2 years in our operational budget.
Okay.
All grants and awards have their own requirements. So as Superintendent Chavez mentioned, the district works together between the coordinators, business services, whoever, applies for the grant. I know today, and anytime we apply for a grant, we have to provide the financials to them for them to be able to see what our income and our balance sheet is looking like. But it really just depends on what the requirements of the grant is.
Okay.
They're all so different, and they all have different deadlines. But
Got it.
And then just a summary of,
Superintendent, remind me what we do with grants when we approve the budget, because we just have to do budget adjustments throughout the year, right?
correct, Board Member Noble, you approve just what we have and what we know at that time. Every other grant would remain pending, and then the board would approve those through a bar.
So that number will look low when
Yeah.
we approve. the
yes,
budget.
exactly.
Yeah, I believe when the board approved our budget last year, it was about 200 and some million. As you can see, it's just really increased throughout the year.
And just recapping on last week's study session with community and family engagement, and some of the things that we brought forward as far as possible board priorities. As you know, some of these were in ESSER and other grants, but attendance coaches, community school staff when the grant expires, as I mentioned, community in schools, is a great partner of ours, and that's something that, their service that they provide to us really exceeds what we provide to them financially. Cooking with Kids, of course, NDI, the National Dance Institute, Family Student Support and Engagement Officer, attendance stipends for site level attendance teams, which was a great way to get more staff involved with that initiative. And then student attendance incentives. And I know, different schools have that flexibility when we provide them this type of funding to have lunch with the principal, attendance school or store that they have at El Dorado. Different things that really fit their own school community. So those were just kind of recapping some of the items we discussed. And then again, the last bullet, any other areas of focus that you guys may want to bring forward.
Yeah, I think that for the community and family engagement study session, the thing that really, really stuck out to me were the parent academies that Raquel talked about. That was one of the shining stars for me in terms of, engaging parents. I also think just in talking about board priorities, and you guys can steer me away from this, but I know board member Noble has talked about how one of, I believe it was Lorraine Price's big things was having a counselor, a nurse, and a librarian in every school. And I know that not all schools are necessarily able to have someone there all day, every day. And I also know that sometimes that we're allocating them appropriately across the district, but sometimes our need really exceeds what we're able to do. And I don't know if that's a staffing issue or if that's a budget issue, but if there's anything we can do on a board level to support, especially having that emotional and social resources piece there for the kids, I think would be really helpful.
Well, I think with the counselor piece, the CBA sets a minimum.
Right.
You can always go above, but it's negotiated into the CBA. How many counselors, at the elementary, middle school, and high school?
Right.
I don't remember the exact numbers offhand, but the large high schools, I think they have 5 counselors, 1 for each grade level plus maybe a special ed counselor. That I do remember. We just worked on, because I asked the executive director, Sue O'Brien, how do we calculate the way we staff our nurses or nurses' aides? And it was really about a request from the site principal. So we did develop this year a formula to be able to allocate nursing staff to each school across the district in a more uniformed way. Now we can always go above it, but at least we have now some kind of tool to follow and be able to provide that type of information to school communities and the staff as to why they were given a full FTE, a partial FTE, or so on.
Totally. And I think that makes sense to have those justifications and understandings. I just also wonder if we can go, I'm not suggesting change the CBA or how you negotiate the CBA next year, but based on whatever the minimums are, if we're able to go above those, and particularly, for all grade levels, but high school counselors are pulling double duty between doing academic and emotional stuff. It's almost like 2 separate jobs. It's amazing that they have the skill set to be able to do both of those things. So I think, if we're able to do that and then also provide that emotional support for, my daughter's 3rd grade class, those kids didn't go to kindergarten in person, and they're
real special.
They're real special.
I have a 3rd grader. Yes.
Yeah, their emotional needs are kind of exceeding what the counselors might be capable of. Though I know, for example, our counselor wrote a grant to have therapists come in and supplement. I might be getting that wrong. I'm sure I'm not.
No, I was gonna say that.
Okay.
The PMS therapists
Yeah.
that are in the schools.
Yeah.
It's great to have counselors. I think those
Yeah.
are really necessary. And I have 2 of my 3 kids have benefited from having the
That's what
PMS
it is.
therapists.
We
Not a
just-
grant. Yeah.
We just had a meeting late this morning with PMS and their executive team about maybe expanding a partnership, providing more resources to our students, not only at the secondary level, but across the district. So they're on board. It seemed like they were a pretty willing partner, Josh. You were part of that meeting. So they're at the table. They're really great individuals. Provide great support. So that's something that we're exploring to expand.
Yeah,
That partnership.
that's great.
Awesome.
And Board Member Anderson,
Yeah.
or President Anderson, when we did the budget workshops with the sites, mostly the sites, as Deputy Superintendent Romero was also involved. There was a huge team this year, which was really helpful. But like Student Wellness did participate in every single budget workshop. So we did really talk a lot about the nurses and the counselors, but library. We talked with every single school principal about what their needs were outside of what they had received. We tried to fill in those gaps with, whether it was shifting or, to meet those needs. But those were conversations that we had January to February with every single school site this year.
That's great.
I also want to add, going back to the nursing
Yeah.
stuff, there were also conversations if a nurse isn't available
Mm-hmm.
to be there 5 days a week. We did our very best to make sure there was at least an aide on those days.
That's
and
great.
that there was some overlap between the two so that they can collaborate.
Good. That's
to know the
great.
students.
Yeah, that's great. I know our school, even though it's really small, has a nurse come sometimes and a nurse's aide come sometimes. So it seems like there's always someone there.
And then to Mr. Romero's point, having all the different, I'm sorry, Martinez.
It's okay.
Having all the different departments part of the budget workshops with the school sites,
Yeah.
I think went a long way.
Yeah.
We're still developing that, trying to refine it, but I did speak with another board member from another district. He asked about, that type of workshops with departments and sites.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something they're going to recommend to their district because it really helps inform departments and staff or sites of their budget and keeps them within their budget, right? And that's important. So,
Are we supposed to talk about other priorities now?
whatever you want.
Well, I just, kind of want to tack on there to say that I'm really hard pressed to think of anything that's more important than mental health and attendance. Like, those are kind of the highlights for me, but the social emotional well-being of our students, like, they're obviously in crisis.
They're obviously in crisis. We have
And it's really wrecked me over the last week.
I'd love for us to think about a little bit of a process to establish board priorities.
That's a great idea.
And, maybe it's building out a list. And I think there's sort of a sweet spot at the level of specificity, which may be somewhat more specific than mental health or mental wellness. And this is where, Superintendent, I think, we need you and your team as to what some of those things might be, and a little bit of a dialogue of, that if that is a board priority, what are we asking for? Because that's a little bit general, and maybe it's not at the level of, for example, you also said attendance and then incentives at the site level. That actually feels to me a little too specific.
Yeah.
We can talk about it, and obviously, and there may be some variety there, but I would love for us to have some time to think about that. I appreciate the review of what was discussed at the board retreat.
Yeah.
I think we also had some key things in
The evaluation.
the evaluation, which, we might have to tread a little carefully there, but, and I think we can just look at the timeline and maybe do some work in between, because coming up with all our board priorities right now feels not necessarily like a responsible process, but I think it doesn't have to be onerous. We could just
Could
Yep.
we talk about that in terms of like calendaring when we wanna, like,
Yeah.
when we need to know those things by so that you all can put them into your
Very good.
Yeah, and I think that's why we provided that timeline, just so you can see,
Yeah.
spring budget workshop.
right.
You know, I think that's one of the key calendar dates, because that's when we start to receive that information, and that's when we start building out what the budget could potentially. So I think, you know, if we start looking at that date, is when, and that's about a month away, is when we can start really diving into maybe board priorities, discussion about what we've heard from the spring budget workshop, things of that nature.
We have a study session on the 21st right now, right in the middle of this budget workshop. But I don't think that us setting our priorities means you have to do anything. Like, I mean, right away, right? Like that, we don't have to know what the SEG is or what any of it is in order to set our priorities. They sort of exist outside of the machinations of the budget for right now, before they come together.
Correct.
At that point. So I don't know if it makes sense for us to do that since it's sort of before the workshop is over, or if it makes sense for us to wait until the workshop is over, or if it makes sense for us to do it sooner.
I mean, I think we talked about this before. I don't think we should do it in the middle.
Right.
I don't know.
It was
Yeah.
mentioned at the last board
Yeah.
meeting.
Right.
So that date doesn't work, and then the next week is spring break,
Yeah.
as Sarah pointed out, and so, you know, we could discuss it the previous week on the 14th as an
Mhm.
item.
Yeah.
And maybe that's worth, you know, having a placeholder there, but then digging in, you know, in April. And if I understand correctly, the 10 to 14 business days, so we look at the end of June, but we really need to be done mid-May because of all of that uploading.
Well, it really, okay, so the PED has not even given us a budget submission date. I think it's going to be a little bit earlier because spring budget workshop is earlier. So they've pushed forward that deadline, so I expect it to be. But this is not a joke. 2 years ago, we had staff that worked here for 24 hours
Yeah.
submitting the budget,
We
and
don't want
it's,
that.
people have families,
No,
you know,
right.
and but it really, there's so much work that goes into submitting it into the OBMS system, and then for us to submit it into our financial software, it's not the same upload. And a lot of it is manual work. So 10 to 14 business days is really what we would need after the board approves minimum to get those budgets in place by the due date. Yeah, and that's with our budget being due end of May. You know,
So
it could
really,
be
we should
earlier.
approve the budget no later than May 9th.
Yeah, that's, which means we probably need to have, because we usually have done better with having 2 meetings so that we can sort of sit on it. So having,
Well, I think what we also discussed, we wanted to have a study session.
yeah,
That way we could really get into the meat and potatoes of it.
Yeah.
Kind of going back to the way it was pre-pandemic, having
Yeah.
a study session. We kind of got away from that when we returned. So we look at, you know, the calendar and just identifying, you know, it could be a board meeting or a study session for that meat and potatoes study session.
I believe it really revolves around too when we have the final pieces to tie everything together. You know, we didn't receive our 910B5, our certified 910B5 till a few days before the board approved the budget last year.
Yeah.
You know, so we're really hopeful to have that. But personally, I would love to see this happen in April if the information is there, because we do start interim audit in May. And it's a work in progress audit is, but it just depends on when that information is there. But it is really tough for us to finish tying up budget and start audit all in the same month.
So is it reasonable for us to think that we can have a study session April 18th and then approve the budget on the 25th of April?
And or the 9th.
Oh.
Yeah.
And or the 9th. But wait, you just said maybe making the 11th a study session rather than a board meeting?
I mean,
It's up to you.
Sorry, I was
Yeah.
eavesdropping.
Yeah. And that's what we did with this one, right? It was a scheduled
Yeah.
board meeting that we turned into a study session. So any of those dates, even dates that we don't have listed, right?
Yeah.
But it looks like between April 11th, 18th, 25th, and May 9th, we have enough meetings
Yeah.
to do it. And how the sequence falls out in terms of when you're ready and what you get the information, you know, whether we do the study session on the 11th or the 18th.
Yeah.
I think that would work.
Agreed.
And then, you know, we do have the options of the 25th and the 29th,
Right.
and the 9th.
Yeah, I mean, this is like the biggest thing that we do, and we should spend as much time as we need on it. So I think that makes sense.
But then, you know, there's not a lot of, I mean, we should basically talk about board priorities, I would think on the 14th.
Yes, I agree.
And probably eliminate the 321 study session now that we're doing advanced planning.
Yeah.
But, and maybe, you know, maybe we can do a little bit of a written exercise. I've gone through 2 pens. Is that real? It's true.
It's these ones.
You know, if we're all willing to do some homework and review what we've been provided here in terms of what we talked about in the retreat. I don't know, Sasha, if you're up for thinking about how we might look at and talk with Tony about just sort of whatever we said.
Yeah, I can do that.
In the evaluation and how that might work.
Yeah.
You know, obviously it's not about performance. It was items of emphasis. Or emphasis.
I like that one.
And then ultimately, I guess it would be our responsibility then, maybe we could get a reminder for this to come to the March 14th meeting with any additional priorities that we can then throw on a list and chew over and either refine at that moment or at a future meeting.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And or ask questions of the superintendent, such as what would you recommend in terms of priorities for mental health?
Right.
Right.
You know, at another level of specificity.
Yeah, I think if you can think on that too, I think because we know that one will be a major thing, and we know that something's happening, and there's something that we can do to help prevent, you know, the horrific tragedies that we've seen, and we don't know what that is. So, you know, if we can come and sort of think about how that works together, and then I'm sure we'll have other things too. But I think that makes sense. Do we keep that a regular meeting? Not a study session. That's a regular meeting. Yeah. Just depends on where we sit.
We can still approve action.
Yeah. All right. Sorry. We can we'll go to actual advanced planning in a little bit, but I wanted to just talk about that now while we're on.
And if we're done with that, I just wanted to ask a little bit more about what was heard in the site conversations and how, that's one question. And then the second question is sort of how is the nursing thing working? Like, are we seeing that that's something that is working well and should continue? And
Well, I'd like to speak with the nursing piece, and then I'll let the team talk about those workshops. It's ongoing. Like I said, we have more applicants in that area. However, our planning was for...
I mean the plan.
Yeah.
For how we did it, sort of different approach to providing nursing support at school sites.
Yeah, so with the development of that, it's still ongoing. We still have to take a look. If by chance we can get more certified nurses, then that would always trump that nurses aid, right? And so that's kind of where we're projecting. That's kind of where our goal is. Now, if we can provide, because of a lot of things that are happening in our schools, If we can provide nurses, across the district, absolutely. We want to do so, but we also want to make sure that we have the appropriate staff to place them in those spots, not just somebody that we're going to consider, a nurse, a nurse's aide, somebody we want to make sure they're highly qualified and they want to be part of the district. So for us, our goal is to expand it, use that as a template, that formula that we're creating, and then refine it over the years to come, because our goal is to get more counselors, nurses, even librarians into our schools. But this I think, is a step in the right direction, because we just didn't have anything in place previously to really start with a baseline and then move forward. Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about the site meetings?
Is there something specific that you? We
What are the
invited-
common themes you're hearing that people need or ask for?
It was ensuring, of course, that there were counselors, specials as far as like music, art, and PE, ensuring that they had, enough FTE around like the electives or specials in elementary. We invited like our new executive director of bilingual ed and student wellness, special ed, so everybody was at the table to hear these conversations and the needs. I think for the most part, they were happy that there weren't any cuts. So it was really just conversations and then us taking note, like if you what would be something on your wish list.
So
And we have that documentation. I can't think of anything like off the top of my head.
there weren't a ton of wishes. And like Deputy Superintendent Romero said, there were a lot of key players at the table. We actually had to move them into the boardroom because we had so many people. And I did hear, and the associate superintendents were here. There was just a great team. And I just heard that it was the best that it had ever been. But I will say that even as we look at like our budget this year, cash and whatnot, and the additional asks, there weren't many, because I think we're just budgeting better. We're staying true to our budget, and we're working those things out throughout the year and not really at a budget cycle. We don't say, well, we can't make it happen. We may say we can't make it happen with operational, but let's see what we can do with another funding source. So there really were not that many asks. A lot of principals did come to the table already with SAC input, and that was really important.
And that was something you guys had mentioned last year.
And we really tried to address it and work with them for those that had not yet worked with their SAC or had not yet had the conversation of budget or budget input with their SAC. So we kind of like coached them and worked with them on the conversations that they would have. But a lot of them came to the table prepared. There was not really, I know in previous years it was a lot of needs not being met, and this year I'm being totally honest, there really wasn't much, because
I can remember one department asking for more safety aids. So that was something that we said, wish list item, and we'll take it through the budget season. I also want to mention, we really worked hard on the ceiling with our SEG should be about 85% on salaries and benefits. When we first started 2 years ago, we were about 94%, if I remember correctly. And then that leaves 6% to really invest in instruction, classroom, sites. I think we're now at 81%. So we've really staffed appropriately. We've watched, so now we can make more investments in the classroom and provide additional support. So that was something else that we made sure. So when we talked in years past about being overstaffed, just based on the number of salaries and benefits in the SEG, they were correct. So we've worked hard on making sure that we streamline. District level staff have picked up additional responsibilities. So we've really done a good job of sharing without spreading ourselves thin, to give us that wiggle room to invest in our classrooms, in school sites, and other programs.
And I will add that it was also good conversations around ensuring that they had operational funds for instructional materials and supplies. So they were, for the most part, I think people were happy with their instructional materials and supplies budget and professional development, so that they can do things specific for the schools.
Yeah.
Where in years past we couldn't,
Right.
now we have that flexibility.
That's great. When you say that you're able to take these funds and invest them into the classroom, what does that look like?
I think touches base on what the deputy superintendent said.
Yeah.
Instructional materials,
Okay.
professional development,
Professional development,
other
supplies
support.
that they need at the school.
Okay.
Could even be stipends.
Mhm.
And as I mentioned, even during those budget workshops with the sites, we looked at what their current year expenditures were looking like. So if we saw that a site, needed a little bit more, we would build that into their budget, or that we would bring for approval later on, or find other sources for them at that time. I actually really enjoyed them this year. It's just they're 2 weeks long back to back every
Yeah.
single hour for 2 weeks long. It's a lot, but it was great. They were great.
When you're kind of looking for additional money for different sites, I know that there's a vetting process, but does it feel like it's typically pretty equitable in terms of like geographic and demographic expenditures? Okay.
Absolutely.
I think it's gotten a lot better. I mean, I would say when I was a principal with two superintendents previous, it was not equitable, and so some schools had lots of money and others didn't, and so I think we've done a good job to make sure that we're being equitable across.
And that's why those site budget meetings are so important.
Mm-hmm.
It's because you have everybody at the table, you're transparent, you're answering questions that they may have. So it's gone a long way.
Okay.
I think too, just along the way was principals and department leaders getting to know how to look up their budget and utilize our financial software. I think that really helped them be prepared or even be in alignment with where they should be this year. So that's something that we really pushed out and had the support of. But yeah, and some of those adjustments to the site budgets on instructional materials or PD, those have been taking place throughout the last couple of years, that we've been, making those adjustments to as well.
Cool. I had one question way back that I forgot to ask. How much does it cost us to have a community school? Like when we run out of funding for a community school and we have to supplement that funding, like when we run out of the state funding and we have to supplement?
The biggest cost is the FTE, the coordinator.
Okay.
And we just, what do we usually budget with salary and benefits, just on average? I want to say it was
for a teacher.
It's
about 107,000.
Okay.
With salaries and benefits.
That's for a teacher. So coordinator, I think a little lower on the salary table, but that gives you a ballpark. So
Okay.
I would guess for a coordinator would be 95
Okay.
salary and benefits.
And are there other costs associated outside
There
of that?
is, but that's why the Crystal's department is so
Yeah.
important,
Right.
because when you can fund different initiatives through our department, through other revenue sources,
Yeah.
and then provide that type of stability, to the sites that need it.
Is that a pitch for the golf tournament?
It is.
Okay.
When I was gonna, a lot of sites and departments now do a lot more applying for grants or fundraising in their activities than
Yeah.
even when I first started the district. They're a lot more active in that.
That's
So
great.
they create a lot more of their solutions for their funding gaps before they even come to us.
Great.
And we didn't get capital outlay for band uniforms.
We did not.
Was there junior money this year or did that not even happen?
It was under a different title, but we didn't get anything there either.
God, what are we going to do?
Do you remember what they?
We could think about that as a budget priority.
Yeah. Right.
Thank you.
Anything else on our? Thank you all so much. That was really fantastic. And thanks to board member Noble too for talking about getting us all together to talk about this early enough in the calendar year.
Well, and thank you for all of this. It's great, and it's great that those budget meetings went well. I really, really appreciate hearing what the sites had to say.
Yeah. Wonderful. All right, should we move on to our action items? All right. So on the consent agenda, is there anything anyone would like to pull off of the consent agenda? Should we separate the minutes?
Yes, I wasn't here on February 13th.
Okay, so we'll vote on the February 13th minutes separately. Is there anything else anyone had questions on or anything? Okay.
Oh, you go. I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda minus the February 13th study session minutes.
Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or otherwise? Okay, that has passed. Should we make a motion about the minutes for the February 13th study session? Do you want me to move? I can move.
So moved.
Yeah, so moved. Excellent.
What she said?
Yep. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. All those in favor of approving the February 13th study session minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining?
I will abstain.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. And then we'll move to the school calendar.
Yeah, thank you, Board President Anderson. So again, this is acceptance and adoption of the school calendar, not approval.
Mm-hmm.
It went through the calendar committee, which is part of one of the board policies. And we kind of had a robust discussion during the presentation, you know, of the meat and potatoes of the calendar that we're asking for acceptance of. So again, there could be adjustments as we move forward, as we wait for the 180-day rule to come out or not.
Mm-hmm.
But this, I think, at least gives our parents and students the idea of when school starts and when school ends.
Mm-hmm.
So I ask for acceptance of the 24-25 Santa Fe Public School calendar.
Is there any discussion or are we ready for a motion? Could I ask one quick question? I noticed that a couple of the ends of quarters happen before breaks. Like there's like a few days in between the end of the quarter and the next break starting. Is that hard for teachers to teach that way, or does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
Or is it just totally fine?
It's fine, and
Okay.
that's why it's important to have that calendar committee
Yeah.
that include principals, teachers,
Yeah.
you know, other community members.
Yeah.
So
And if you look on the bottom right,
Yes.
we kind of break it up as close as we can to
Yeah.
stay within the 40-day count. But so far we haven't heard any, and this is typical, we haven't heard any issues with it.
Great. That's great. I'd rather them do that than spend their spring breaks doing
Yeah.
grades.
Yeah.
That sounds terrible. Great. That was my only question. Any questions or is there a motion?
I'll move acceptance of the calendar for the 2024-2025 school year.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or otherwise? Okay. We've pretty well covered advanced planning. So we'll talk about board priorities on the 14th. Is there a CRC meeting on the 20th? Do we know?
Yes, I
Okay.
believe so.
Great. And then we'll work through the budget as quickly as we can and aim to approve it before May if possible. Okay. Do we want to talk about, because we talked about maybe not having the study session on the 21st. Do we need to talk about that now and go ahead and cancel it or wait until our next meeting?
can always wait. We
Okay.
have that board meeting on the
Yeah,
14th.
On the 14th. Okay. All right.
But we pretty much know you want to cancel it.
Well, we'll have to rush back from Albuquerque.
No,
Yeah,
it's-
that would be
So
awful.
let's just cancel it.
Let's just cancel it. Yeah. Okay.
And there won't be a CRC meeting on the 27th because that's spring.
Oh, yeah.
I'm really disappointed. No,
I'm not really
just
sure
kidding.
why we would have a CRC
Yeah,
meeting
there won't.
2 weeks in a
Yeah.
row, but
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Anything else for the good of the order before we adjourn? Okay. We're adjourned.
Thank you, guys.
Is it just me? Is
Thanks
that a
for
long
that. That
ways
was
away?
awesome. Really helpful.